Hello, good afternoon. Under the cycle's title, The Road to a More Sustainable and Climate Resilient Mediterranean, different actors and stakeholders from the south and east of the Mediterranean basin, including experts, academics, policymakers, representatives of international institutions, and civil society leaders, have debated about the current implementation of climate and environmental related goals in the Mediterranean region under the scope of the 2030 agenda. The worldwide climate crisis and climate emergency is especially affecting the Mediterranean basin. Actually, the Mediterranean is nowadays one of the main climate change hotspots in the world. The region is warming 20% faster than the global average, and the sea level rise may exceed 22 centimeters to 1 meter by the end of the century, while annual precipitation rates will considerably decrease. These climate change-related phenomena, together with other human-induced drivers of environmental degradation of the Mediterranean ecosystem, such as pollution and land use change, are nowadays posing significant challenges for marine and terrestrial ecosystems, and also to human well-being on both shores of the Mediterranean, especially as regards water and food security for future generations. We need to take action now at different levels: policymakers, civil society and citizens, think tanks, international organizations, and so on, to achieve climate-related implementation goals under the framework of the 2030 agenda, the Paris Agreement and the EU Green Deal to secure climate neutrality by 2050. Specifically, these 6 MED dialogues have provided us the possibility to assess the implementation challenges and opportunities related to those sustainable development goals that seek to build a climate-resilient Mediterranean through climate action, clean energy provision and use, sustainable water management, conservation and protection of marine and terrestrial ecosystems, and promotion of green and blue economy. These dialogues tackle most of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals from a cross-sectorial perspective and on how we can make progress in their achievement. In particular, the first dialogue of the cycle was conceived as an introductory session to set the stage for the next dialogues by assessing the impact of climate and environmental change in the Mediterranean, in line with the first Mediterranean assessment report prepared by the independent network of Mediterranean experts on climate and environmental change. The second dialogue addressed the current scenario for the energy transition in the Mediterranean basin, which is the most pressing issue in order to mitigate climate change. It explored opportunities in the future related to renewable energy production and energy efficiency efforts while addressing potential challenges in its implementation. The third, fourth, and fifth sessions focused on responses that will contribute to take up environmentally related challenges and to foster sustainable development in the region, especially through youth activism, climate diplomacy, and the role of cities in all these sessions I'm mentioning as drivers for sustainability. Today, this last session of these MED dialogues will address the untapped potential of the sustainable blue economy by identifying promising sectors, as well as by underlining the opportunities ahead to transit towards sustainable production and consumption blue economic models, aiming at reconciling climate adaptation and environment protection with economic prosperity for our Mediterranean Sea. Different lessons were learned during the MED Dialogues plus 2030 cycle. First, the need to interconnect various sustainable development goals in the design and implementation of public policies to advance toward the implementation of the 2030 agenda and to achieve a more sustainable, climate neutral and prosperous Mediterranean region. For instance, designing strategic, sustainable and green urban agendas that requires to touch upon multiple urban sectors, especially those related to energy production and consumption, housing, land use, waste management, industry, transportation, and land-sea interaction, and it was explained in the corresponding session. Second conclusion, the necessity to provide platforms and discussion spaces between decision makers and citizens in order to respond to citizens' concerns, to further explain the challenges of implementing the 2030 agenda, and to reflect on how the green and sustainable transition will directly affect their lives. And third conclusion, that youth and civil society organizations, along with the local authorities, each one in its sphere of competence and capacities, have a crucial role to play in climate action. Today marks the end of this, with this session, the end of this first edition of the MED Dialogues cycle. Let me express from the European Institute of the Mediterranean the firm commitment to continue to work with in the collaboration with La Caixa Foundation and the Barcelona office of the Club of Rome in future editions of these MED Dialogues. I hope we will be able to organize this cycle again next year, but in a face-to-face format in Barcelona, Palau Macaya, if the COVID-19 situation allows it. Therefore, let me thank La Caixa Foundation and the Barcelona office of the Club of Rome for their collaboration. I would like, of course, to thank all the colleagues that have been participating, and especially let me mention the work of the colleagues in the European Institute of the Mediterranean and its Sustainable Development and Regional Integration Department. Finally, thank you to all the public who have followed us during these last 6 months. I must add that, furthermore, if you want to come over again to the content, the videos of each of the 6 dialogues will remain available on the European Institute of the Mediterranean, the IEMed website. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I am most happy to give the floor to Dr. Manfila Rampart. As you know, she is the co-president of the Club of Rome. Well, she has a long career and an outstanding career. She's a medical doctor. She has been community development activist and is a trustee of the Nelson Mandela Foundation. She has been active working at the World Bank in Washington. She's been the founder of the Open Society Foundation for South Africa and the Citizens Movement. She authored several books and publications on the socio-economic issues, and we are most pleased that she's on behalf of the Club of Rome with us today for this session. So, Dr. Rampart, you have the floor.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this last session of the 2021 series of dialogues. I spent 2 weeks in October in your region, and so I have an even stronger affinity to the region, even though I live on the tip of the African continent. My remarks are going to center around the Mediterranean region as a metaphor for global relationships. Laura Lopresti, in her penetrating online journal article entitled "Like a Map Over Troubled Waters," argues that the Mediterranean region is like the sea and its troubled waters. Even a map can be indisputably voluminous, stubbornly material, and unmistakably undergoing continual reformation. As you conclude this 2021 series of Mediterranean dialogue today, the vexing question remains: are we ready to alter the lenses through which each of us views ourselves and others as countries with such a rich diversity bordering this uniquely body of water. The aspirations you have of a Mediterranean region characterized by sustainable climate resiliency seems unlikely to be attainable unless certain things are built into the process. For as long as the water between you as neighbors has turned from aliveness toward the Cameroonian academic Achille Mbembe terms deathhood, your aspirations are at risk. The fluidity that nature imbued the waters of the Mediterranean with seemed to have turned into the deadly rigidity of geopolitics. I know that the people on this call are not responsible for what I believe is the biggest challenge to the aspiration of sustainable climate resilience. If we cast our minds back to history, ancient Africa, as reflected in Egyptian texts, welcomed what they saw as pale-skinned sea people. These people were brought to their shores by crafts. The sea crafts were no less fragile, perhaps, than the crafts that are today bringing desperate migrants from the south to the shores of countries on the northern borders of the Mediterranean Sea. Can we imagine how history could have unfolded differently had the movement of sea people been policed and constrained with the same vigor as we are witnessing today? Greek philosophy as we know it today would not have emerged. It would have been denied its source of inspiration and nurture, namely ancient Egyptian priests, the philosophers' human civilization. Today, we need to ask the question, what are the costs of the deathhood that has replaced aliveness across the Mediterranean region? The Club of Rome is championing the emergence of a new civilization characterized by the promotion of global equity for a healthy planet. Such a civilization would have the core values of interconnectedness and interdependence in line with all living systems. Nature is teaching us in more brutal ways today about the web of life and its intertwined essence. We believe at the Club of Rome that we need to learn anew what it means to be human in our interconnected and interdependent Earth ecosystem. The ancient African Ubuntu philosophy is anchored on the primacy of relationality, the I am because you are. Ubuntu embraces the well-being of all life, animal and plant, as the only guarantor of sustainable climate resilience. It is difficult to imagine a sustainably prosperous northern Mediterranean region without an equally prosperous southern region. The opportunities for mutuality in promoting shared prosperity and a healthier planet are enormous. I'm sure we will hear about some of them. We are learning as a human race the hard way that national boundaries are not high enough to keep pandemics and climate emergencies at bay. Well-being for a few, as many now realize, is well-being for none. I would like to suggest, and I was very encouraged to hear about the emphasis that you have placed in these dialogues on involving young people. At the Club of Rome, we have benefited enormously from learning from intergenerational conversations. Young people across the globe are leading the way in promoting listening at all levels of society that leads to conversations that build communities, communities built on trust that lead to actions that are mutually beneficial for all. Communities built on trust are essential. As we have seen with COP26, a lot more could have been achieved, but we are nowhere near where we should be. But yet we have practical examples of communities that have emerged in places like Tangiers in Morocco, where the Tamkin Foundation, championed by Karina Kadau, is restoring human dignity and hope amongst those traditionally marginalized. They are boldly demonstrating that well-being for all healthy planet is possible. What would it take to build on these successes to underpin the process of attaining the shared goal of sustainable climate resilience? That is the challenge before us as partners. I thank you.
So thank you very much, Dr. Ramfele. And now I'm most pleased to pass the floor and the session, in fact, to Jeremy Foss. Jeremy Foss, as you know, he's a true specialist on environmental affairs. He's the expert on sustainable development with specific focus on green and blue economy, supporting the transition to sustainability for organizations, cities, and territories in Europe, the Mediterranean, and globally. He is a co-founder and president of EcoUnion, an independent environmental think and do tank based in Barcelona, in Spain. And he is the director of Global Eco Forum, and he regularly advises international institutions on green and blue economy, as well as on sustainable tourism in the Mediterranean region. So thank you, Jeremy Foss, for being with us, and I have the pleasure to pass you the floor and the session. So you take the floor as the moderator and presenter of this session. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Senen, for your nice words, and Manfila for your inspiring statements. And I think we are setting the stage for a very fruitful discussions. If you don't mind, I will switch now to French, because that will be the main language to be used during our discussions with Samir Grim. And as you all know, French is one of the many languages that is used around the Mediterranean. Je tiens particulièrement à remercier.
I would like to thank the IEMed, Senator and his team. Well, I think we've been collaborating for many years, and every time we do so, we have maintained very rich exchanges, and each and every one of us has learned how to make headway and how to support more sustainable development in the Mediterranean basin. And I think the symbol that we represent with this cooperation, joining together European ambition and Mediterranean needs, is something that we can also explore in this dialogue. And I would also like to thank Dr. Manfila Rampart for her historical role at the Club of Rome and her thoughts and the policies established in the world, and specifically what the public powers carry out, NGOs and citizens, that we follow. We follow all of these reflections and thought. And now we will focus on the blue economy. The title of this session is Towards a New Development Trajectory, towards a new development path, a sustainable blue economy, not only for the Mediterranean, but for many countries, especially in Africa and the Caribbean. which are extremely dependent and vulnerable vis-à-vis climate change, and they have this emergency, this urgency to adapt to climate change. And as Senan Florenza already said, and as we saw in the independent expert report, unfortunately, the Mediterranean is one of the regions that suffers the most from the impact of climate change. And I believe that their ambition should be being the leading region in matters of climate change, not only in mitigation, but also in terms of resilience, so that the blue economy can allow us to move forward in the right direction. The blue economy is a concept that sometimes may seem commercial or a marketing concept. And I think that this has a connotation of communication that is also successful and that has allowed us or has allowed for it to be placed in the public agenda for many years now. But beyond the concept that includes the activities that have been carried out for decades or even hundreds of years, for example, fishing and more recently tourism and maritime transportation and biotechnologies, renewable energies, which are obviously the future of our regions, which depend on the Mediterranean and fossil energies. In this field, we're talking about three areas with Samir Grims, who will tell us not only about the case of Algeria, but also the mission to accelerate the transition in the Mediterranean. Transitions or the transition or transitions in plural, because I believe there are three transitions that we need to develop in parallel. The blue economy can be or should be the channel that allows to simultaneously organize these three transitions. An ecological, of course, or green transition should also be an energy transition. The Mediterranean region greatly depends on fossil fuels, and therefore we have a pressing need to develop policies and resources that are neutral at a climate level and that are climate neutral. And from now till 2050 or beyond, we have a true challenge. And this challenge also exists in the countries of the north as buyers of these energy sources, fuel and natural gas. But there's also an economic transition. These countries, most of them, suffer from too high unemployment rates and very limited competitiveness and also a dependency. In the face of a globalized economy, which in a framework of post-COVID restructuring may make closer relationships emerge with the stakeholders with shared values in the north and south. And the third transition, which starts not only at the level of countries, but also regions or cities, which are key stakeholders for the ecological transition, the green transition in the Mediterranean basin, and also governance systems that should be established and that allow us to collectively share resources that are extremely limited, marine resources and coastal resources. And we see the emergence of a Mediterranean society which tries to create spaces for debate. And we also have the need to accelerate these formal and informal exchanges, not only amongst governments and the different parties in power, but also the different stakeholders of civil society who have more difficulty to participate in these debates that are extremely necessary to think about this future of the communities when we talk about this debate instances. Well, the three transitions will be tackled by Samir Grim. Algeria is an example of these three transitions, and they could be a source of inspiration, maybe, and of learning, positive and negative learnings. This is what Samir will talk to us about. I think in general terms, the background reflection should be what is the system we need to establish, not only economically and politically, to guarantee a blue economy that is truly sustainable and that will lead the Mediterranean region towards a prosperity zone by 2030, in which climate and the south and north divide, the climate issues and the north-south divide will be reduced or even eliminated. I will now introduce Samir Grims. I've had the honor of working regularly with him during the past few years, and it is truly a pleasure and an honor to have this debate with him. He is the spokesperson for a more sustainable economy in the Mediterranean. He is also part of the École Nationale Supérieure des Sciences de la Mer in Algeria, and he's also been a leader of initiatives such as the WestMed for governance and improvement of blue economic policies in Western Mediterranean countries. And this is an initiative that could be imitated and replicated not only in all of the Mediterranean region, but also in other maritime regions, which also have the need to develop a system and mechanisms that allow us to accelerate the necessary transition towards a sustainable economy for a prosperous and inclusive society. So if you're ready, Samir, I will give you, I know you have 20 or 30 slides, so I think we can give you 20 minutes, and then we will have some time for Q&A, and we will be able to react to your presentation, and then a debate that will be conducted via the platform that we are all connected to. Samir, if you're ready, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Jeremy. Thank you all very much. I also wanted to thank the organizers for having given me the honor of being invited here, because using the two words in the same sentence, dialogue and Mediterranean, has always been difficult. It has always been a difficult dialogue, that of the Mediterranean. So I would like to talk about the topic of this Mediterranean dialogue. It is a fascinating topic because if we speak about the blue economy, well, we have a great economic investment here, but also social investment with the creation of jobs. And we also have a dimension, which is there are practices in the Mediterranean basin, north, south, east, west, in terms of fishing, tourism, employment, and occupation of the land, which are a motivation. There is a cultural pole in the Mediterranean as well. And there is a political dimension as well. A political dimension because the maritime space has always been a space of diplomacy amongst countries and also a space of confrontation sometimes, but at any rate, a space of dialogue about maritime challenges. So I very much liked the choice of topic for this dialogue, and I will take this opportunity to launch a new, or using this opportunity to launch a new dialogue in the Mediterranean is very attractive because this dialogue about the blue economy for 2021, well, since July, we've been participating in a series of international events, the World UICN Summit, the COP26, which just ended, and COP22, soon the Barcelona Convention. All of these spaces of global negotiation have all reserved sessions or conferences or task forces or panels for maritime and blue economy, and probably due to climate change and the blue economy, there isn't a single maritime region in the world that can have an economy which is not blue at the moment. And in the past few years in the Mediterranean, we have seen initiatives such as WestMed or the promotion of BlueMed, which has been essential for scientific research and academic innovation. And startups always upon the referential framework of the blue economy, and also Europe, which is striving for neutrality by 2030, has created its own Green Deal for 2050. And this Europe, which is also facing the Mediterranean, and in a country such as Algeria, 3/4 of the exports of which go to Europe. But then Europe creates a series of conditions of accessibility and borders vis-à-vis the South. So the blue economy and the Green Deal are a very important issue for this region as well. In 2021, if we see what has been done by FAO, the Barcelona Center for Production and Sustainable Production and Consumption, programs such as SwatchMed and the 2020 Horizon, these are just small samples, small examples, and we've seen how much interest this has all generated in Europe and in the Mediterranean space. All of these programs have generated a lot of interest, and they all have a dimension which is directly related to the blue economy. So we are necessarily in a Mediterranean context in which environmental challenges is very important. Those who have spoken before me have already talked about climate change, biodiversity, ecosystems, pollution, and plastic waste. These are a serious problem for peoples in the Mediterranean. Also, economic challenges, lack of resources, globalization. Currently, borders are becoming more diffuse, both in terms of opportunities and risks and impacts. And then we have social challenges. Jeremy talked about unemployment, especially amongst the youth. And the blue economy has proven via a series of means the creation of small companies, startups are a solution for employment of young people and women. And it is also very useful in terms of resilience in the face of crisis. We will see the impacts of COVID. Fishing and tourism have had a great impact, and the resilience we will see about the resilience of European Mediterranean peoples vis-a-vis this crisis. We are pushed to reflect upon these topics. We see ruptures in terms of the evolution of science and technologies, which currently allow us to access maritime territories and depths that were inaccessible only 50 years ago or a century ago. So currently, there is a great strength in the depths, and there is a risk that this facilitation of access to offshore technology and robotics and digitalization, well, this is an opportunity for the Mediterranean, but it's also a great risk because there will be fierce competition, and also the risk of the unsustainability of marine resources is a real risk. I wanted to briefly remind you the blue economy wants to overcome the antagonism of the economic development with the health of the sea, and it helps create a durable sustainability. We cannot think in terms of 6 months or 1 year. It wouldn't make sense. Our horizon shouldn't be that short term. It wouldn't make sense because this is something that should be based on the long-term sustainable development and equitable economic growth. The blue economy, and here we have a cross concepts. There are 3 concepts that are completely linked. We cannot decouple them when we talk about the blue economy. The GIZC approach. The blue economy aims at making a sustainable use of the coastal areas linked to the presence of the sea, safeguarding it for present and future generation. It is impossible to think in the long term if this is not a public process that aims at finding arbitration for the occupation of marine spaces and also for the uses and activities of this space. What did we have 50 or 60 years ago in the Mediterranean? Only fishing and navigation and just a bit of tourism. not many cruises, but now we have gas pipelines, we have fiber optic crossing the Mediterranean. In Algeria or Marseille, we have Medgas, for example, and recently there's been a lot of success with food aspects or the passing of gas pipelines in Morocco. So the gas that goes through the Mediterranean is a cross-border issue, and oftentimes it also becomes not only gas and oil, but also the blue economy is a matter that can have a geopolitical or geostrategic scope that goes well beyond the Mediterranean. So the aspect of exclusive marine areas is completely against the blue economy. We need arbitration, and this is very interesting. This is carried out at the Intergovernment Conference of the UNESCO, and I have the feeling that in 15, 20 years' time, at least a part of the maritime space would be under an S&P regulation, 2%, 3%. And very briefly, I've borrowed these slides by Mr. Visage, a good friend. He is an expert in the blue economy and maritime economy, to give you a global overview, to show the maritime space and the blue economy and how these are there are a series of activities going from maritime tourism, shipbuilding, yachting, and also thalassotherapy, which is a treatment that needs for the Mediterranean to be in good health. And we cross this with public policies in terms of environment and risks, special planning, etc. And here we have international relations, research and innovation, natural resources, defense and security. And I've talked about special planning and risks, and climate risks and coastal risks as well in maritime and coastal areas, which is amplified and aggravated due to climate change. And therefore, of course, there are conditions in order to reach these goals in the Mediterranean. We need to develop a joint vision, integrated governance, and we need to develop tools that allow us to make a smart integration of all of these factors. Very briefly, I will show this slide to say that the blue economy will also be supported on ecological sustainability. We cannot talk about this in a polluted space full of waste and a space which is exposed to increases of sea level and a greater evaporation, and a significant part of the GDP related to the blue economy is related to not only fisheries and agriculture, but also based on the marine economy, including medical industry, treatments for Parkinson, for example, these types of conditions that are treated with active substances that are extracted, especially from the maritime space, for example, sponges. There is biotechnology inspired on biology based on maritime species, and therefore this ecosystem approach in coastal areas and this planning of maritime spaces is absolutely necessary. And then also we need to give long-term opportunities for the development of the blue economy. Let's talk about the trends of the blue economy in the Mediterranean. I'm speaking quite fast because I don't have much time. I will review the principles and trends of the Mediterranean. And here I found inspiration in what was done by the expert group of the Union for the Mediterranean. And vis-a-vis tourism, about 5 million jobs in the Mediterranean, especially in the south. What are the competencies needed for sustainable tourism in the future of the Mediterranean? Reducing the dependency of fossil fuels, smart planning, research, innovation and development. And if we ask the question, is there a space for young people and women in fishing? Jobs are 50% in the hands in fishing and aquaculture. 500,000 jobs, 50% are in the hands of people over 40 years of age. And here we realize that overfishing, the FAO stresses this, is leading us towards there is overfishing, and we are going towards different goals of aquaculture. And in terms of maritime safety and security, the tendencies are in artificial intelligence, self-driven vehicles, and competencies. ICT, these are dominated by men, and in ports and transportation, the trend is towards potential growth of 5 to 10%, and there's a lot of room for growth in this field, and the competencies necessary for ports and transportation are digitalization, green transport, and experience in the field of the environment. With regards logistics, this is also an interesting field. If we talk about innovation and research, the trend goes towards biotechnologies and the environment. The competencies needed are ecological solutions, basically. And I don't know why the slides keep jumping. I'm trying to stop them. Regarding renewable energies, the trends are wind power, solar power. And the competencies are high-tech and mainly the installation and the preservation and maintenance of this structure in the hands of young people and women. And there is a slight male dominance in the Mediterranean in this area, but at any rate, the conclusion of experts is that there will be many opportunities for the youth and women in this sector. As to the environment, basically, the trend is for all professions, and the competencies are in valorization, protection, conservation. And we have a new trade, a new job or profession, if we can call it that, which has developed, which is remediation or the restoration of habitats. In terms of training, is cross-sectional in all of these areas. This is a general trend. And vis-a-vis the future, in terms of needs, you may have seen that the traditional trades are the ones that will prevail, but we also see a massive introduction of biotechnologies, big data, and robotization in maritime jobs and professions in the Mediterranean. But if we look more towards the south, to be fair, we have countries in the north of Africa, we have 7,500 kilometers, 16% of the Mediterranean coasts, approximately 183 million inhabitants, 70% of which are concentrated on the coast, and 95% of exchanges in these countries are done by sea. 2 out of 5 inhabitants depend, or their livelihood depends directly or indirectly from the sea. So necessarily, we have this snapshot at the moment, and we see clear that both for the entire Mediterranean region and the rest of traditional activities are what we see on screen: fisheries, aquaculture, maritime traffic, mining, oil and gas mining. And we also have this globalization that is increasing in the context in which the countries of the Mediterranean face stress. We have 4 pillars: energy security, energy or safety, food safety, health safety or security, and diplomatic security, which will be an increasingly important element of the economy. The 4 pillars of this blue economy for the whole of the Mediterranean countries and in particular for Algeria and the countries in the south, are financial crisis that hit the southern countries, healthcare crisis that we all share, unfortunately. There's no difference there. And then the challenges are related to economic resilience, social resilience, and economic resilience and climate resilience. We have energy, economic and environmental transitions, and almost all countries of the south of the Mediterranean are facing political changes, political transformation towards a new economic model, and especially the famous transitions that Jeremy already mentioned and that I mentioned myself. So what are the key components? There are no secrets here: innovation, value change, partnership capacities, and internationalization with observation, vigilance systems, being alert and watchful, and a mobilization of the civil society with different forms of organization cluster. And as I said, control and evaluation in climate change and negotiations are tough. Regarding reports and in terms of assessments, we'll see the same trend in future years. So what are the three main drivers? First, demographics. We clearly see that demographics in countries of the south is not yet under control. Demographics and the concentration and polarization of the population between inland and the coast, and then the geography, an unequal distribution of resources, and climate change, and a GDP which is very dependent in the south. For example, in the COVID crisis vis-a-vis tourism has had a great impact in Tunisia, and they're facing a huge crisis, and the vulnerability gap is increasing. So the approach for the blue economy is based solely on capital. This graph was created by SML, Pescares, and Atkins. They assess the potential of the blue economy in the countries of the south of the Mediterranean at the Club of Rome, in the east, in the countries of the east, and we see this approach of capital. We have three components: natural, technical, and human capital. So natural capital, the natural heritage; the technical capital is financial and infrastructure and services; and human capital includes knowledge and culture and heritage and governance. And this is important in order to take into account maritime aspects for public policies and this exchange with maritime activities which are carried out currently, because there is a very strong dimension of the market in the blue economy, SMEs and the value chain. All of these impacts public policies in terms of the blue economy and the intervention of public stakeholders. So now very briefly, because I don't have much time, on value chains. The starting point, we do not work only on activities. We go upstream and downstream. We try to find development and services, the planning of maritime spaces. This creates value. We have the challenges of territoriality, the management of the distribution of maritime space, and we have the evolution of the national context. Here we can see it very clearly since 1963 with different strategies related to coastal areas, the different European policies. For example, this year with the first strategy of the countries of the south of the Mediterranean vis-a-vis the blue economy, with the support of the EU, and all of this has allowed us to develop, from the organizational point of view, the blue economy. And here we can see how we have developed this blue economy, and we couldn't have done that without the current arbitration of all sorts of activities, onshore, offshore, aquaculture. All of these activities that need infrastructure, logistics, human resources, competency, savoir-faire. All of these is a dynamic which starts with the blue economy and acts as a catalyst. Therefore, we have a governance division, a functioning vision, and technical division. Governance goes through investments in innovation and research, the legal framework training. In Algeria, we have a national committee of the blue economy, which helps us establish smaller projects. We have a view inspired in what is happening in other countries, and if we want to refocus, we will need to redeploy activities, consolidate what we have already done, organizing the reference framework, cross-border aspects to be able to have a look at economy, and we need to be watchful and vigilant. All of this to say that the blue economy in Algeria is a direct response to government programs. There are two key components which are directly related to the blue economy. First, public network coming from popular aspirations, and currently the financial reform and economic reform with resetting of the system. This contains many of the components are at the basis of the system. The funding of the system, energy transition, development of statistics and information, respect for rules and norms. All of these referential framework, I insist, we are establishing observatories of the blue economy. We had 3 regional observatories, and at the same time, we have this strategy with this breakdown. We have established the national committee. We have also regional committees, and the most important thing and the main aspect for me is that this fora that have been established, this fora allow us to have exchange platforms between civil societies, scientific society to jointly plan and assess and to make use of the opportunities coming from the blue and sustainable economy. And we have a portal, a national platform for the blue economy, the development of scientific capacities to revisit and review the strengthening of capacities at all levels for this capacity building. This image is shows on the left in the x-axis the current weight of activities, and on the y-axis potential activities. Some of them, such as maritime transport, the current weight is very significant, but the future potential is not too high. And if we talk about maritime tourism and biology, it's the contrary, high potential, low current weight. And we also have cruise ships, construction or shipbuilding with a low current weight and low potential. So in the framework of the program I mentioned, this has allowed us to create a strategy with adaptation measures which are necessary, sectors which are just starting, such as renewable marine energies and cruises, and then sectors which are under development, such as coastal tourism and others such as leisure. And I cannot finish my presentation without talking about the Western initiatives. This is an excellent example of collaboration between countries of the Western Basin, Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, and the South, Morocco, Tunisia, Mauritius, and we have established a common framework, public-private framework, to establish cooperation with the development of projects and strategies for communication and governance structures, funding opportunities through IEMed. What we do is we bring together the partners of the different basins of the Mediterranean, and we have an initiative for the sensitization and awareness raising. And COVID-19, I don't have the figures here, but the conclusions These are the conclusions of the Union for the Mediterranean, the expert group of the Union for the Mediterranean. And we see there are 3 areas which have a key impact in the Mediterranean basin: tourism, a drop between 60 and 80% of international arrivals, greatly impacting Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia. The impact on fishing has been great. Fishers could not go out to sea, and also maritime transportation has had a direct impact due to COVID. We do not have the figures, but at a worldwide level, it is 1/3 of the impact. In Europe, more than 27% during the first few weeks. So climate change and COVID have led to an extraordinary period of crisis for humankind in general and for the Mediterranean basin. So we've learned to do things during this time. We've learned to work together, even if remotely. We've learned how to do many things, and we need to use the lessons learned during this crisis if we want to really have a blue and sustainable economy in the Mediterranean basin. Thank you. Thank you, Samir, for this presentation, this detailed presentation. I think that you very thoroughly tackled both the challenges and the opportunities of the blue economy in the Mediterranean. In the western region of the Mediterranean basin and in a country such as Algeria, which is crossroads of these development models, and is also an example if the transition is conducted adequately in the coming years. And I would also like to stress the huge dependency of the blue economy on natural ecosystems. And if natural ecosystems are not in a good health state, there will be no blue economy, no maritime economy in the Mediterranean. And unfortunately, we know that the planet is currently in a state of extreme suffering due to climate change. And the loss of biodiversity is a huge challenge that we need to face at a worldwide level and also at a regional level. And also, if we talk about the energy transition, well, this should be done at a global level for electric production systems, but also the sectors of the blue economy, tourism, fisheries, and maritime transportation will need to transport the way they function to be able to use cleaner technologies. And this is a true challenge vis-a-vis the future in the blue economy and the green economy in the Mediterranean, and generally speaking, globally speaking. And the last topic that you stressed and that we could debate about with the other speakers is the difficulty of the current governance models, the difficulties they've been under due to COVID. Well, are the ambitions adapted to the huge challenges we are facing, especially in the most vulnerable countries in the south and the coastal communities, which are the most impacted by this climate crisis? And they do not see enough ambition in those who have the capacity to make decisions in the big governmental forums. So currently, there is a failure in governance modalities, but also at a political and economic level, and we see this in the Mediterranean as well. Some countries, especially China, take a stance in sectors of the blue economy with impacts that are difficult to perceive at the moment, but they can set the trend of the future evolution of the blue economy. So the blue economy in the Mediterranean does not depend solely on the countries of the Mediterranean, but it also depends on the global geopolitical challenges that are sometimes not taken into account. And the last item that you also stressed, the WestMed initiative in Algeria with local observatories that take the communities into account, are in the territory, and they are the ones that create value and that can use maritime resources, and they integrate in the observatories and systems, not only as subjects of the activities and policies, but also in their drafting and the establishment of activities that help accelerate this transition. And I think that with this very thorough introduction that we made, we could now talk to the audience. Now we give them the debate, and maybe before passing the floor over, Manfila, are you still with us?
Because you are also based in a blue tourism dependent country and continent, and I think your insights could be also very interesting. This is really up to you, and then also Samir, you can react, and we will also share some few questions from the public.
Compelling, and it raises very important issues. But there are some very serious philosophical issues about, if we look at the Mediterranean region as a commons for both North and Southern countries, what is the most appropriate governance structure that will make sure that not only the dominant people benefit, but everybody benefits? So that's my first major question around this. The second is about the idea of capital. Is it really appropriate to talk about human capital and natural capital, given the fact that these matters, I mean, human beings are supposed to be sovereign in of themselves. To designate them as capital introduces a serious problem in terms of values of where I come from in my continent, where people are not only important in themselves, but they are sacred. And so the use of capital when it comes to people is a problem, I think, for many people. And we need to think about it, because it is that view that was behind slavery, is that view that was behind colonial conquest. So we need to be very measured when we think about it. The issue of natural capital is also a problem, because human beings have removed themselves from nature. So nature is there and we can regard it as capital. Whereas in fact, we are part of nature and nature is us and we are it. And so that's my philosophical difficulties with some of the things that were said, but that the sea, not only the Mediterranean Sea, but globally, presents opportunities, there is no doubt. But the question is, how do we harvest those opportunities without doing further damage to the health of the planet?
Merci beaucoup, Manfila, pour apporter aussi cette perspective distance.
Thank you so much, Manfila, for contributing this perspective from the African continent and this global vision of the Club of Rome. Obviously, they are matters not just financial or political, but also philosophical. And the goals that until now have been mainly related to the GDP. So to an economic measure that should also integrate social and environmental measures. And this is not being done enough. And the challenge of going beyond the limits of the planet and the needs of the people living in this region. Okay, so I have two questions that have been shared. And maybe Samir, you could respond. The first question is about protective maritime spaces, which is a very pertinent topic because, as you mentioned, the UCL conference was organized in Marseille in the Mediterranean a few months ago, and the Convention on Biodiversity, which should have been held last year and was held this year in China, with unclear goals, not only really to a quantitative goal, a certain number of percentages, I think 30% for by 2030 of protective maritime spaces, but also qualitative, because unfortunately, you've proven, Samir, that with these maritime spaces, that they are very debated, and that sometimes there are economic sectors that come into conflict are in protected maritime areas, but they do not have the follow-up capacity, contrary to terrestrial spaces, in which we have the capacity to observe and to penalize and punish actions that are harmful. Unfortunately, in marine areas are larger and more difficult to observe. And then there's another question that could be working for a blue economy that uses natural resources and economic resources, and also maybe the capacity to create models that regenerate maritime coastal systems that are extremely degraded and that will suffer from the impact of climate change. And I'm thinking specifically of Egypt and the areas around the Nile. So what could we do so that these economies are not only based on extraction as they've been until now in the modern world, and so that they can also find a true balance and they can go back to the capacity of natural systems so that we can have quality of life and security in coastal areas. So Samir, maybe if you could answer these two broad questions. Thank you. I switched devices. I'm now talking on my phone. Can you all hear me? Okay, yes, thank you. So I would like to answer to the philosophical question expressed by Ms. Manfila, which I think is very important. And currently, it makes us rethink the economy and the environment and globalization. And let's see, personally, my idea is not attaching a value. It is impossible to attach a value to a species or a human being. It is impossible to calculate the value of a species or a human being. But the green economy, the blue economy, the circular economy, everything related to the environment, we have a current trend, a global trend. It happens in international instances as well and locally as well for development policies. And this trend is to try and measure everything, measuring damage, prejudice, loss, profits. And this leads us, well, maybe we will need to use another term, but we use the word capital, quote unquote capital. This all takes us to this notion of capital. But I completely agree with the fact that it's dangerous if it's misinterpreted. If this terminology is misinterpreted, this is dangerous. But from the economic point of view, unfortunately, we lost Samir. Okay. Yes, I'm here. Okay. You can continue. We lost you for a minute there.
C'est un peu haché, mais là, je crois que c'est reparti. Vous m'entendez comme ça? Ouais, vas-y.
Unfortunately, we cannot hear you very well. Can you hear me better now? Yes, I was saying that the risk with the monetization of green systems is precisely this. So the two questions that you proposed, the first one was the intensification of maritime activities and coastal activities. And the solution that we found currently is to find arbitration mechanisms But this is not resolved. We have not reached arbitration between tourism and fishery, or the industry and sustainable development, or marine biotechnologies and fisheries, for example, or cruises, especially in the Mediterranean, which is a small space, semi-enclosed, where everything is exacerbated. Distances are small and conflicts become amplified. So we have a great difficulty to find arbitration. And this cannot be dissociated from the second question that you proposed, or the person who proposed the second question. The model, what model should we use? Well, after having been a negotiator on behalf of the Algerian government, I've participated in different sessions, and I've concluded that there are two concepts. Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, the carbon market, and this article is related to loss. And I think in future years we will find a solution in terms of co-responsibility. There is no strong political leadership in the Mediterranean or elsewhere. These problems are not solved with typical solutions, with small-scale solutions. We need solutions proposed by scientists, the territory, the different organizations, the UFM, the regional centers of activity, the Barcelona Convention, the different fora and organizations, the European Institute for the Mediterranean. All of these spaces propose solutions, but these solutions do not have strong political leadership. We cannot solve these problems of waste and the ecosystems, degradation of the ecosystems. There will, of course, be a divide between north, south, east, and west. But if we want true solutions for the Mediterranean, for the good ecological status of the Mediterranean, we need durable and sustainable jobs in the area of the Mediterranean. And for that, we need political leadership with a framework that can solve these problems in the Mediterranean, and or governance framework. So the Barcelona Convention, well, there is a European space and a Mediterranean space, and everything is complicated at the moment. And I think we cannot dissociate, we cannot decouple the political aspects with the environmental aspects. They cannot be decoupled, and we need global solutions, and for that we need true leadership. Imagining an evolution of the, I'm imagining an evolution of the UFM or the Barcelona Convention in terms of or governance. I think you got in depth into these aspects, and now I will tackle the last two questions. I think that with these last two questions, we will reach the end of this debate that could, well, we could talk for hours, but unfortunately, as everything in life, it must come to an end. And there are two questions. On the one hand, we talk about a governance and an economy that should be supported by science to avoid drifts, as we've seen in the traditional economy, especially in terms of climate change. So what relationship can we find to improve the interface between scientific research and these, or scientific actors, and the specific application of their knowledge to generate a truly sustainable economy? This is a very deep question, but it is important for the integration of the blue economy, or at least its development. And the final question of this session, which was also proposed as a medium, makes us think about the model of economic transition. The blue and green economy will create jobs, we know that, especially in renewable energies and more sustainable tourism, but it will also destroy jobs. And it will generate difficulties for some countries or regions in order to go from a model based on fossil fuels to a renewable economy, because the the competencies for the jobs are not the same. There's a mismatch, and therefore there will be a gap that can generate tensions between European countries, especially those in the center. And we will also see this in the south of the Mediterranean, the southern countries. So in order to accompany these changes, which shouldn't only be economic, but obviously human, and therefore, well, these are the two questions that I think you could answer. And with that, we will reach the end of the session. Maybe the closing words could be given by Dr. Ramfile, if she so wishes, and myself. Samir, you have the floor to answer these two questions. Okay, so vis-a-vis the first question. Could you remind me of the briefly remind me of the first question, because I didn't write it down. The interface between scientific research and its application in the blue economy, specifically to make it truly innovative and sustainable. Well, let's see. It is a two-edged sword, because I could say simply that there is enough scientific knowledge at the moment regarding the quality of the environment and regarding marine biotechnology. There is enough science in the Mediterranean regarding exploitation and overexploitation levels, for example. We have enough science about the rise of the sea level. So there's been a lot of progress in the scientific community. And I will mention three examples. One, the MELEC group, which is in the blue field. They're a group of Mediterranean scientists and some from other areas, from very different communities, who deal with aspects of climate change and biodiversity, but related to the blue economy. So if there is an excess, all regional instances also publish reports, expert or scientific reports. And how can we provide an answer? I contribute responses at a small scale. The Well-Made Initiative, for example, has focused on blue shipping and green transportation. We've been able to pull together scientists and people with decision-making power for maritime transportation, and they debate about the dry area, the controlled emissions areas, the north, and the establishment of a Mediterranean area for the control of sulfur emissions, to see the impact on health. And SPI is a platform of exchange between politicians and decision makers at an economic level and the civil society, who take specific decisions, specific solutions at a local level, and also transmit for transborder matters, grouping together different stakeholders and scientists. And this allows for the creation of ecological farms that produce aquacultures, and science allows us to find true small-scale solutions for the blue economy. Do we listen to the scientists enough? I don't know. At any rate, I don't think that's the case at the moment. Political decisions made at a country level don't necessarily follow the recommendations of the scientists. And we would need to multiply these platforms that group together scientists and decision makers. And for that, we need a mobilization, virtual or physical mobility between scientists and politicians, so that they can see what is happening here and there, and to have an impact on their planning. We need to reach them, because in many countries of the Mediterranean, especially in the south, we have the difficulty to identify the GDP by sectors and subsectors. So the structure of public finance does not allow to exactly make focus, sectorial or intra-sectorial forecasts based on scientific data. So this is maybe where we would need exploration in more depth. For the economic transition model, we cannot successfully achieve this transition if we cannot accompany the people who need to make a transition or who need to learn new consumption or production techniques because the previous ones are not sustainable or durable. And we could imagine, for example, a Mediterranean fund for environmental transition. Maybe it's a dream. But currently, there are sources of funding, but the funding is not done strategically. There are funders who sometimes fund development operations but do not take into account the environmental and climate prescriptions of the countries of the South, for example. And maybe we would need to establish a direct link between North to South funding and environmental performance without compromising the socio-economic well-being of the countries of the South. As we've said, it is a transition, and I think that the future of Europe and the countries in the Mediterranean could be related to funding measures related to the green field, related to economic performance, and reducing the wasting of natural resources and reducing the gap. I think the economic transition is still developing and again is related to the capacity of political leaders, heads of state, Mediterranean countries to come up to the level of the challenges. Thank you very much, Samir, and I think we've reached the end of the debate. But before I pass the floor over to Dr. Manfila Rampart for conclusions, I would like to, in line with what you said, I would like to give the example of the EU in the plans for relaunching and rebuilding, in which they have imposed climate conditions to fund countries, especially Mediterranean countries in Europe, Spain, Italy, which are the ones that have received the more funds from the EU, Greece, Spain, and Italy, and obligating or making it compulsory to accelerate the economic transition. And I think the conditions of national and international funding are essential so that countries are compelled to accelerate their transitions with, of course, some room for maneuver so that they can choose their transition model and not just funding great actors, great stakeholders that could that have the economic capacity or the human capacity, and also SMEs, which are oftentimes more fragile, and they suffer more from the impact of what you mentioned, the COVID crisis, and many young people and women depend on these SMEs that are the most impacted again by this forced transition towards a more sustainable economy. Dr. Rampart, if you wish, you can have a few seconds or minutes for conclusions, and finally we will conclude the debate. Thank you very much.
Mine is simply to say thank you, but to warn us against forgetting that science is not value-free. And this is why it's so important, particularly in the Mediterranean region, to also leverage indigenous knowledge coupled with science gives us a much better base for communities who have for eons of years known how to use the ecosystems around them in a more sustainable way. But I couldn't agree with you more. We need funding for fair transition so that communities that depend on diminishing resources can be able to make the transition to ways of doing things, including to be very active in the restoration of damaged ecologies. I thank you very much. And on behalf of the Club of Rome, we are delighted to be part of this, and we want to continue to be a partner in these very important conversations. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Samir. Thanks, Manfila. Thanks to the IEMed and to all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci.